Hello and welcome to Desk Deployment. My name's Dave and today I'll be painting an Ultramarine tactical squad for Horus Heresy. Recently some of my friends convinced me to give Warhammer 30k or Horus Heresy a try, and after playing a normal standard game and a game of Zone Mortalis, I've been well and truly hooked. So naturally that means that I'm going to be needing an army to use in 30k. Now I still have some Firstborn Space Marines left over from my Ultramarines force, so to keep it simple I thought I'd do Ultramarines for 30k as well, and then once I've got a decent sized force I can look at maybe doing a traitor force, maybe Night Lords or World Eaters, something like that, but we'll stick with this for now. Now I wanted my 30k Ultramarines to look slightly different to my 40k Ultramarines, so I'm going to go through a new scheme that I've settled on. And just before we jump into today's video, I just wanted to take a moment to say that I know recently I haven't been uploading as many videos as regularly as I have done in the past, and this isn't because I don't want to or I've got bored of making content. As you may have guessed, this is something I do in my spare time. I do have a full-time job that pays the bills, and at the time of recording this is my industry's busiest time of year, so it's simply been a case of not having the time to create new content. I have taken note of the comments that people have been leaving on my videos, and I do plan to do another Fallout related video in the not too distant future. I'm also going to be doing a video purely on basing, and I do have a few battle reports that are in the works, so you're just going to have to be a little bit patient with me. Okay, so enough of the excuses, let's get into today's video. So as usual I start off by cleaning and building the models and gluing them to a temporary base. I then move on to building their final bases. I start off by layering the bases with cork and then gluing stones to random bases to look like rocks. Next I add texture paint to the bases, making sure not to cover the rocks and trying to keep the texture as flat as possible where the model's feet are going to be glued to the base. It's then time to crack out the airbrush. With this project the airbrush is going to do the majority of the work for us, so apologies for those of you out there that do not have access to an airbrush. You may be able to get this similar effect using a combination of rattle cans and either dry brushing or glazing. I give the bases and the models a black undercoat and then a zenithal highlight with white ink. When adding the white to the models I try to make sure that I put more on the upper parts of the models to make them brighter, and also down the middle and front of the backs of the legs. After the white has dried I get out a dark blue and put a layer of this over the model. It's quite hard to see with the camera, but the layer should be thin enough that you can still see the difference in shade from the previous step. Next up I use a blue ink. I focus this on all the areas where I want there to be a shadow. Finally I give the model a very light zenithal highlight with a turquoise and focus it on the areas where the light would catch. After finishing with the airbrush for the time being, I move on to the bases. The zenithal highlight I've given the bases is mainly to give me a light colour to paint onto, as well as to use as a roadmap as to where to place my colours. I use quite watered down brown paint, an ivory and also a reddy brown acrylic ink. I start off by adding the brown to the deepest areas, then the ink to the majority of the base and the ivory to the highest areas where the light would catch. I make sure to do this whilst each layer is still wet so that they naturally blend into each other. Moving on to the models whilst the base is dry, I paint the armour seals and the gun casings with the black before heading back to the bases and painting the rocks with a grey. I then give the whole base a brown wash and once dry I give the rocks a light dry brush with a sandy yellow. Next I dry brush all of the black on the model with the same grey that I used for the rocks and the bases, and then paint silver on the weapons, backpack exhausts, and also for the pole for the Vexilla. In 30k, the sergeants of the Ultramarines are identified by a white stripe on the helmet, so I use some thin tape to mark off the area where there's going to be the stripe, and then paint it with an off-white. Next I paint all of the trim with gold. I then focus on the Vexilla. I start off by painting the cloth and the leaves with an off-white, and the skull and the parchment with a sandy yellow. Once those layers have dried, I apply a green ink to the leaves and a brown wash to the skull and parchment. After the washes have dried, I paint the skull with an ivory colour, making sure to leave the recesses. Next up I paint the eye lenses. I paint the whole lens with a dark red, followed by a lighter red, a smaller line of orange, and then a smaller layer of yellow, and finally putting a white dot in the corner. One step I forgot to press the record button on was the lettering on the Vexilla. For this I simply traced out the placement of the letters using a sharp pencil and then painted over the pencil with black paint using a sharp brush. It's always helpful when the word has an odd number of letters, as you can place the middle letter first and then work out either way the placing for the rest of the letters. Once the models are dry, I apply a layer of gloss varnish to the models with the airbrush. And after the varnish has dried, I move on to applying the decals. Now with this, I have recently come across the Micro Set and Micro Sol products, and I can honestly say that I'm very impressed with the results. I start off by soaking the transfers on a wet piece of paper towel, and then before applying it to the miniature, I put a layer of Micro Set, that's the blue bowl, on the area that the transfer is going to sit, and then put another layer carefully over the transfer once it's in place. After the Micro Set is dry, I put a layer of the Micro Sol over the transfer, and once dry I put another layer of the Micro Sol on the transfer. I do this step a few times. The end result is a transfer that almost looks painted on, and any creases or bumps that I'd normally find when putting on the Ultima symbol onto a curved surface is not there. Heading back to the bases for a second, I finish them off by giving them a layer of black paint on the rims. After the transfers are dry, I give the models a pin wash with black oil paint and clean up any mistakes using a makeup pad. With the oil paint dry, I remove the models from their temporary bases and glue them to their finished bases. Finally, I give the models a matte varnish. And here we have the finished unit of Ultramarine Tactical Marines, ready to bring justice to Horus and his traitors. hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. Stay safe and hope to see you again soon.